Soccerex connected. A very good afternoon here at our HQ in London. Brand new digital studio for the second edition of our biggest ever global online football conference. Make sure that you engage with us. A very good morning to those of you waking up bright and early and probably in the snow in parts of North America and South and Central America as well. And a number of you already engaging with us in Asia as well, where we are heading into early evening. 2,500 delegates or so yesterday, and we hope to beat that number today on day two, where our theme is Stadia and Event Operations. Today is presented by Musco Lighting, and as a result, we're asking you a very simple and fun question via social media, which is this: who is your shining star in football? And there's one caveat, which is we've put an age limit of 21 or under on it. And if you're picked out at random, having given us a great name and hopefully an explanation, maybe a photo as well, then you enter the draw to win a signed shirt. And we've got lots to give away. You get to pick from the selection. Go to @Soccerex if you want to see what shirts are available. But we've got Louis Saha, Laurie Lindsay, Deco, Carlos Alberto, Jean-Pierre Papin will be posting photos throughout the course of the day. But who is your shining star at Soccerex? And use that hashtag as well, please. Soccerex Connected. Myself and Patrick McKenna, the head of sales and marketing, were talking about this earlier, and I gave mine as Lauren James, young, talented Manchester United forward, who I think is going to go on to win lots of caps for England over the course of the coming years. So who's your shining star to stand a chance of winning the signed shirt on day two? Make sure you engage with the exhibitors as well via the app. And if you want to see the full schedule for the day, that's on our website, and it's also via the app as well. But it's noon here in London, so let's move on to our opening panel of the day, and it's brilliantly titled Organised Fun. With several major tournaments being either delayed or postponed, we're talking about things like the Euros, the Copa America, the Gold Cup, the Olympic football tournament, and even potentially knock-on effects to the 2022 World Cup, which was moved to winter anyway, but over the course of the coming months, we'll learn whether anything else is going to be pushed. Under-17 Women's World Cup, futsal events, they've all been affected by COVID-19. So this session is going to investigate what the new normal looks like and what steps need to be taken to mitigate risks in order to ensure that our stadiums and event operations are safe. To talk about this topic, we are delighted to be joined by Amy Hopfinger, the Director of Events, Competitions and Operations at the USSF, Chris Bryant, the Head of Tournament Delivery at the Football Association, Sander van Stiphout, the Director International at the Johan Cruijff Arena, Balazs Makray, the Head of International Relations at the Puskas Arena, Philip Moggio, the General Secretary at CONCACAF, and steering everybody, despite the fact that he was almost snowed in Connecticut. It is a warm welcome, a slightly ironic way of putting it, given all of that snow, to the founder of the Equalizer. It's a very good morning, Jeff Kassoff.
Thanks for that intro, Ben. I appreciate it. Yeah, very cold here, very early. Appreciate everybody joining us. Happy to kick off day two here of Soccerex, and a great intro there for us to dive right in. Organized fun. I know fun maybe isn't the first word that comes to mind with this topic of how to navigate the pandemic, but we're going to hopefully give you some insight into how everybody on our panel is doing so, because it's something that obviously we're all still dealing with, and major events coming up, as just mentioned, and many on the horizon. And obviously those need to be navigated in different ways. So everybody's introed at this point, happy to say. So want to dive right into this. And obviously at the end of this, if you have any questions, please send them through, and we'll attempt to get to them and hopefully cover as much as we can for you in these 45 minutes. Obviously a big topic to bite off here to start day two. But I want to start a little bit generally, and we'll dive into some specifics, because there are some really interesting case studies already, some events that have already happened, obviously, during this pandemic, and some that are on the horizon already being planned, and some of our panelists, I think, just still in markets coming out of events that just happened. So I'll start with each of you, and maybe Philippe, if you could go first. I want to start with the unique perspective of almost a year into this pandemic already, obviously not on the end of it yet, unfortunately. What is one big takeaway that you've taken thus far in terms of how you are planning events and how you are doing things maybe differently than before?
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I hope everyone's doing great. And look, we're a year into a very difficult year. We've learned a lot, that's for sure. And I think one of the most important things that we have learned in when first having to cancel competitions and how to figure out how to reschedule those into a very busy calendar. So working with your stakeholders is essential. Working with everybody that's affected across the system is critical. So communication has been very important as we look to resume our competitions. It was great to see competitions in our region restart last year, seeing leagues across the CONCACAF region restart, seeing Costa Rica, seeing the MLS, seeing Liga MX begin to replay their competitions, and for us to be able to work with them to reschedule competitions. One of the things that we've learned through all that process and being able to begin our club competitions in the last quarter of last year is ensuring that we're all working under the same protocols and putting the protocols in place to be able to operate in a safe environment in the middle of a pandemic. If you stick to those protocols and you communicate those properly, then you're mitigating all the risks around the competition, and hopefully you're able to get through those in a risk-free way. So that's probably the biggest takeaway that we've learned, and we need to figure out how to continue working with those protocols, ensuring that those protocols are in place leading into, during the competition, and after the competition, because it's going to be with us along the way. So ensuring that everybody understands those and sticking by them is probably the most important thing that we've learned and that we'll continue to operate under.
And Chris, you've been through some competitions already. What's it been like from your end?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's been such a sort of whirlwind of change and sort of adaptation, as we kind of go through this and we learn more and more sort of every event, and with this sort of pandemic situation changing. I think for me, one of the sort of things I would sort of reflect on in terms of what's been so essential, and kind of what we would learn is almost the importance of, I think, what a lot of us call the brilliant basics. I think kind of the importance of ensuring that the fundamentals to delivering events, are there in place and really well planned. I think they've never been so kind of key and fundamental. And that could be operationally, if you think about hygiene factors or people flows or space management, access control. These are all things we've always been doing in the delivery of events. And I think they've almost become even more important. And I think kind of you just can't underestimate the importance of planning those basics at the very best level. And even from a planning perspective, making sure our event plans, our communications, contingency planning, kind of having clear roles and responsibilities. I just think they've been shown to be so key, because they've really been the sort of foundations to enable us to get events back in play. We've had return to play protocols, we've had all sorts kind of medical provisions put on us. And I sort of see it less about new technologies and new ways of working, and actually focusing it on the real basics, the real core elements to delivering events. And for me, that's I think what's really kind of got us through the past year. I think it's what will be incredibly important as we move forward. So yeah, that's from my perspective.
Sandra, I think that touches on maybe something that you mentioned previously in our chats, that things have accelerated is maybe the word, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I completely agree with Chris. I mean, we did have to rethink all our processes and procedures. However, I also see a big acceleration in digitalization, in helping, tools that actually help us with, rethinking these processes and redesigning them, and also, finding technology to monitor the crowd, hopefully when they go back in. And it basically helps us to facilitate, or it facilitates us to learn. I think the digitalization in that sense accelerated will help us in the future to be more agile in our event processes, to rethink them on a regular basis. We might be forced into that, really. So just to prepare for the future, I think that is one of my takeaways, at least, of this period.
Similarly, from an event perspective, Balazs, want to get your perspective of how things, one of the first events back really, or back being a relative term, but so you bring a unique perspective there. What have you taken away from that?
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I hope all of you are safe. We are quite a new stadium. I mean, we opened in 2019 with a full house match against Uruguay. And then our organization, our stadium is new, and we began to get our things prepared, and we began to develop ourselves throughout the preparation phase. And then we faced that preparing for Euro, that it's a difficult situation, we have to cancel it. So what I would take and really accept what Chris and Sander was saying, that the basics of the preparation are very essential. But what I would take from this period is that we have to adapt to unpredictability and also uncertainty, because the regulations of the governments are changing in the meanwhile, and also there are very different scenarios to be prepared and to be adapted to. So I would say that we had to learn that how to adapt to having no time to prepare, and in that sort of a short period, you have to take you have to get all what is necessary for an event management point of view.
And Amy, you've just come out of some events, even one just the other day. What's the biggest takeaway for you, or one big takeaway for you thus far?
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning, good afternoon. And thanks for making me go last, since everyone had had some great points. Flexibility is really key. To double down on Philippe's importance of protocols. I mean, those have been what we've lived by since March of last year. So taking the time to build those and spending time on those has been super important, but also being able to be on the ground and understand where you might need to look at those again, and what you did on a computer without being live in an event might not actually work on the ground. So understanding how to learn, to adapt, to grow, to change, to follow the science, because that's constantly changing, and it's constantly changing how we operate in this world. All those things have been really important, and having a team that's really able to go with the flow, and understand that things aren't how they used to be, and we don't really know necessarily what we're walking into every day, because we're at the whim of test results and all kinds of different things that are outside of our hands, that as operators, that's not usually the case.
Well, Amy, I do want to lead off with you actually in transitioning to
Thank you.
Maybe a more specific topic as we dive into. I'm sure many of you watching kind of nodding your heads along at some of the takeaways in general here. But Amy, you've just come out of a few different events in your role with U.S. Soccer. The U.S. men and women have now played already in 2021, and things change rapidly, right? I mean, She Believes Cup coming up has a change of opponent recently. Venues, just little things maybe that we never even hear about or see that are changing every day. So everybody just touched in the intro on contingency planning to some degree. How different does that look? Because I'm sure anybody watching us talk right now, whether they're at the highest levels, and we're going to talk about these major tournaments that are being planned for in just a few months' time, but even down to the youth level, how do I schedule my game? Play it if XYZ happens. So how different is contingency planning? Is there something maybe specific you could share on just what that looks like in this era and how it might change going forward?
Well, we're contingency planning on a lot more levels than we typically would have. As the sport, we contingency plan for weather and certain things like that, but not necessarily embassies or consulates being closed around the world and visas not being able to be processed, or different government restrictions and lockdowns and quarantines and so on that seem to pop up every day now. So we've learned along the way that best laid plans, and we're prepared for anything and everything, whether it be an opponent shift like we just had with She Believes, that we were able to quickly work with our counterparts at other federations around the world, as well as our government, to make that happen. Thankfully, from a venue standpoint, we've been pretty lucky, and within our own teams, we've been pretty lucky. So we've really focused on our full national teams at this point. So as we start bringing in more programming, we'll learn that there's some different contingency plans that we haven't thought about and need to start planning for.
Chris, how about you at a domestic level with some of the events that you've put on? What so far has maybe been different? Obviously, I think fans are a big thing that we sort of talk about and see, but much more behind the scene for contingency plans.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, to reiterate some of what Amy said, that the contingency planning has sort of moved into a new space where we seem to be having more challenges with getting the teams over. We have difficult challenges with, venue availability. The football calendar is a bit more condensed now. Some stadia, don't necessarily have the availability to host the international matches and the under-21 games. So, we've definitely had to be thinking a bit more around our contingency planning there in terms of availability of facilities, of teams. And then I think, I think our contingency planning now is, I think we're fortunate. We've all had the opportunity to play games behind closed doors, and I think we've got into a good rhythm with that. So now it's about how you start to layer up on top of that kind of plan. And our contingency planning exists around, well, what about, if we had to move events, if we have to add in fans, to what level, might we have to add in fans, and kind of the scenarios that we build on to bring the events back to some form of normality. And our planning really sits around all of that. And then, it's not just around fans. We've got movement of staff across, Europe. If you take even you've got broadcasters that need to come and go. We're even in regional lockdowns, at some point of the year, and therefore, how do we move fans from one part of the country to the other? How do we move broadcasters around even our own country, let alone Europe? So, there's definitely been a sort of a next level to contingency planning, that's for sure.
Philippe, I'm wondering from a perspective of managing this, maybe at a level of so many different federations, obviously, and planning for big tournaments, which we're going to talk about. Euros coming up, Gold Cup obviously affecting you. This is something that maybe is not, some folks might be approaching from a singular federation or tournament perspective, but you're looking at a confederation perspective. What does that look like internationally, so to speak?
Thanks, Jeff. And 21 is going to be an incredibly busy year for us here at CONCACAF. We have our club competitions, we have our Nations League finals, we have our Gold Cup, we have a lot of World Cup qualifying. And sitting here right now, we're working to ensure we can deliver all of these competitions in a safe manner. And we know from our experiences in 2020 that we have the protocols to do so. How the public health situation adapts will determine how we're able to execute all these events, and we'll be guided by government authorities and public health experts as we navigate a very difficult environment. But the key is ensuring that you have the plans in place, which include fan attendance, no fan attendance, and how you navigate through all that. But it's essential to be adaptable and having those contingency plans in place, because as we saw in 2020, you will be executing a lot of those contingency plans across all your competitions. So being prepared, being adaptable is critical for everyone involved.
I wonder if we can talk a little bit before we shift to maybe the fan element, just tangibly speaking about these contingency plans. Maybe folks are wondering, okay, what do those look like? If any of you can give an example of what that looks like, maybe from the perspective of time is something we don't necessarily control, right? It's events are scheduled to take place, and you can build in maybe a day or two shift, but what do you do? How do you react to a team can't travel for the entire event, or maybe a home game, obviously, for qualifying, and that obviously has a knock-on effect into getting these teams qualified for a tournament and getting that set. So how do you, this for any of you that maybe have a good sort of specific example, but how do you plan for the fact that, Monday is coming, and by Monday we need, a team, or we need a game to happen in order to advance to a new round?
Jeff,
Well,
maybe
I
I'll
can
jump
start.
in.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Amy.
Well, I'll let Philippe answer about World Cup qualifying because I'm interested on that one. But historically, events love to be announced early. We love to get out and sell tickets as early as we can, and that's just not the case these days. So we're waiting until the last minute for these announcements, until we've got everything locked in. We're working through contingency plans in terms of venues and locations and states and cities that allow different fan capacities. So while it would be in our nature to get out and be out there early and ready to go, we've kind of pulled back on that and have found some comfort in making sure that we've got opponents locked in, making sure that we're in a situation with the state and local governments where we feel comfortable on not only hosting the event, but fan capacities and so on and so forth.
Jeff, I'll jump in on a little bit of the experience we had at CONCACAF last quarter when we rescheduled our CONCACAF League, which essentially is our second tier competition. We were able to reschedule that competition in a single leg format. Typically, it's home and away. And what we had to deal with in terms of contingencies and planning is ensuring that if there's a suspension of a match or there's an outbreak of COVID, do you have the calendar or the ability to reschedule those matches? And if you don't, then you have to go to your regulations and determine who's at fault, and maybe a team has to forfeit. And when you're dealing with those situations, it's always about the timing you have to reschedule. When we get into centralized competitions, it's that much more difficult because you've only built in just a period of rest. So if you're in a moment of having to reschedule a competition, the trickle down effect is massive. Similar with World Cup qualifying, right? You have a window, you have 10 days, you have to generally play 2 matches in that window. So if you have to suspend a match and reschedule it, finding it during that window is going to be incredibly difficult given the logistical nightmares that you're going to have to deal with. And then obviously the calendar is incredibly packed in the following windows. So you get into situations of maybe having to forfeit a team and things like that, which is not ground you need to get into. But obviously you have to think through all those iterations to understand what would happen in the event that you have to go down that path.
Yeah, and I think we've seen maybe leagues have used, even here with MLS, we've seen points per game used because windows have kind of dried up. But obviously, as you said, you basically at tournaments build in rest days, and those can be affected. So I want to talk about some of these tournaments that are upcoming because we're staring down a few of them, obviously. And two venues that will be represented at Euros, folks from 3 different venues, 3 different countries that'll be part of the Euro competition. The delayed Euro competition are represented on our panel here. And I think, firstly, fans are something that we talk about quite a bit, and maybe are one part of this very big element. Playing the games and getting them off the ground are probably the most important thing. But Sander and Balazs, the games, you've both played games, hosted games, conducted events at your venues during this time, and you're planning for some very big matches ahead. Where are we with fans and them coming back, and how you're planning for that, if you are at all? How important, even in your process, is that? Sander, maybe if you want to start.
Well, you know, as we are a venue, right? So ever since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we basically started to work on first getting matches back in the stadium. Okay, that happened fairly quickly, but then also get people in the stands, and that actually happened in July, August, up until first weeks of September, and then we went to zero audience again. So yeah, we've been trying to prepare ourselves of reopening for fans, because that's the only thing we really could do. So we engage heavily with with the local authorities and also the authorities on a federal level on, where was the worry, where was the risk, in the travel movement. If fans are gathering in the center of the city, how do we prevent that from happening? When they actually enter, how do we know that they are not infected? And first there is a questionnaire they have to answer. Okay, and then only if you answer that correctly, you can actually enter the venue, or your ticket is being activated. Now we're getting in the situation suddenly where there's vaccinations taking place. So if you received your vaccine, so how do we get that information in some sort of format safely and securely, so that we open the gates for the people that actually have been vaccinated? Those are all things we're trying to prepare for. Are they in the stands? Monitor their behavior. Social distancing is now, of course, still very much in the plans. But what happens if social distance regulations go from 1.5 to 1 meter or to a half a meter? So we have to really, for us, it's only the beginning. If we reopen, perhaps we are allowed to get 10,000 people in, but we have to push it to 55,000 to full capacity. So it's going to be an entire process where we have to, work with a relationship, work with the local governments and build that trust relationship, or we have that trust relationship, but, to make sure that they're comfortable with taking the next step in increasing the capacity. Of course, regarding the tournament, we don't know exactly where that's going. That's really up to UEFA. We're just trying to be ready and give them the necessary tooling to create a safe environment for whatever they decide. And maybe, and also nudging people is also going to be important. Like, are people adhering to the regulations? If not, what do we do? It's for us, it's only the beginning. Reopening is not is one step. It's going to be numerous steps, and it might actually take a certain period of time. So we're very much looking forward to it, but it's also going to be challenging. So that's how we're trying to prepare, by finding new technology to support us in that field as well. And then that's also why we sought the cooperation with UEFA, with City Football Group, with the Dutch Football Federation, Ajax, and we wrote a big challenge, to bring us the right solutions that potentially could help us. And that actually was very helpful. Brought us over 300 solutions. Of course, all the gel manufacturers also, took part, but actually brought us some solid solutions that we're now test driving and in some cases implementing in our event processes.
And Balazs, similar experience, I imagine, and not too long ago, your arena hosted an event, a big event, European UEFA Super Cup, with fans. What's that been like, or what was that like, and where do you feel like you are in sort of navigating that process of bringing fans back, how to do it safely, and what's changing really?
Well, it was a kind of a pilot project for UEFA and for us also. So we had, as I mentioned, I think three months to prepare. But what Zander said, that it was a crucial point that we had to have a very good relationship with the local and also the national government. As during the preparation phase, there were several and we had to adopt ourselves and our processes for that. It was So what I think that what we and also the fans want the same. They would like to come back to the stadium, and we would like them to come back to the stadium. But it will be a step-by-step procedure, and you have to. I mean, of course, you have to make them comfortable, but now we have to make them comfortable in a little bit different way. So they want to feel themselves comfortable in the COVID situation as well, and they want to feel themselves safe. So you have to do a lot of things in the preparation. First of all, you have to take care of the players. So you have to guarantee that the staff is not infected, and that's that we had a very good system. It's called the epidemiological acknowledgement. It was an electronic system. You received every day an information for accreditation to your smartphone. You have to fill the form, and then you could enter. And of course, you had to go through the thermal scan station as well, which was also for the staff and also for the fans after the match as well. So I think there are several things for. I mean, the signage was awfully different what we had before. I think we had something extra pieces like stickers and posters on the. We had to reschedule the queuing system just in front of the concessions. And also there were a lot more things that we used. The ticketing, of course, the mobile tickets were I think around 90% in used, and also for the toilets we had to do a one-way system going in and going out in the only door. But I think we could do it well with UEFA. But the feedback was that out of 5 people, 4.5 felt it safe, felt the whole environment safe, and also 87% thought that they would come again into this kind of organization and into this kind of circumstances. So what you do, you have to prepare, as the others also mentioned, and also you have to make the environment comfortable, and you have to do it gradually. So I don't think so that we'll have the first match in the next match in the Puskas will be. It will not be definitely a full capacity. You have to do it step by step.
You mentioned some of the technologies there, and I was looking over some notes from both you and Sander about some of the technology I think we'll be seeing, and I think we've seen some already, and probably will only continue to develop, of checking health at the gate. You mentioned vaccines are now part of the equation, and whether you figure out if someone's vaccinated, ticketing being contactless. I think that was a trend that was happening anyway for the most part. But even, I thought one that was interesting that you sent through, Sander, was cameras to actually detect the social distancing and I assume enforce it, right?
Yes, so we do have cameras in place, indeed, that detect social distancing, but also, and that's maybe even more important, how long the regulations are broken in that sense. So, because otherwise, as an operational person, you go nuts because where should you go, which people to address, etc. So, our regulations are broken for a longer period of time. You can actually address the people and make sure that they keep their social distancing. So these are things that we're now implementing in our just regular event processes, and hopefully we can phase that out quickly. But nevertheless, we need to be ready for this situation because we don't know exactly how long that's going to last. Also depends on most likely on the whole vaccination process here in Europe.
Jeff, I think I think the spectator piece is definitely one area. I mean, we've spent months, and I think all stadiums have, with UEFA starting to redefine all of the spaces. They're going to operate so much differently. If we assume that we're going to have to maintain social distancing. You know, UEFA and all the venues have had to go through huge exercises of replanning every room. Does it work in this scenario? And then you know, we're still in that sort of phase of, we're not quite sure. Well, you know, what does a hospitality offering look like? You know, what does the buffet, does it exist? Can it survive, you know, the sort of pandemic? And then, you know, you ask yourself questions like, you know, can we serve alcohol in venues? You know, if you're trying to social distance, can you serve alcohol? Does that sort of make sense? Does it align? You know, where does government stand on that? And so there's obviously this huge question for all of us around bringing fans back into stadia, and at what level, what percentage does social distancing exist? And then, you know, you've still got all these other elements for us that we're still asking ourselves questions around, you know, about these, what can support fans returning, and what does hospitality look like? And, you know, what does a volunteer centre in a socially distanced stadium with reduced capacity look like now? And kind of, is it a necessity or isn't it? And all these questions that you're definitely looking at. I mean, even we talked about mobile ticketing, cashless. I mean, at Wembley, we've also brought in mag arches, you know, kind of on this concept of, well, actually, if we don't need to pat down fans as they come in, that can avoid contactless. And we've got, you know, mag arches now, which the NFL use and quite a lot of stadia in America use, you know, kind of to help that sort of journey. You know, I think as Sander and Balazs have said, it's, you know, it's almost trying to take all those little bits of elements and just put yourself in the best possible position so that if the pandemic goes in the way we hope, and if government restrictions start to ease, then actually the stadiums are going to be in the best possible position they can be to bring back as many fans as they can. But I mean, yeah, it certainly feels like it's going to be a very different Euros than one we'd all planned. But I think, you know, I still think it can be quite special, and, you know, hopefully we'll get fans in there nonetheless. So
each of you touched on, you know, the UEFA will kind of have the final say, obviously, and I think that's probably something in terms of fans, certainly that's changing by the day as this sort of pandemic goes on. But Philippe, maybe from a CONCACAF perspective, you know, several events coming up that we talked about. Gold Cup is one of them that's typically not a single venue, but a centralized event is maybe the term for it that you used. How are you navigating the planning of that specific event? Do you have any updates for us on that? And, you know, I want to talk too a little bit about the governance side here quickly, because we've all sort of mentioned local governance as, I don't want to call it a barrier, but certainly a guiding force, and it changes by where you go. So how are you dealing with local government in this huge umbrella of planning an event like this?
Thanks, Jeff. And yeah, for our 21 Gold Cup, we're certainly doing a lot of work to prepare for it. It's a July event, and this year we also have a preliminary round scheduled as part of it. The draw took place in September, and there's a lot of positive anticipation leading into it. And we're putting in plans in place for a lot of different scenarios. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to determine how is the best way to execute this great event for us. Will there be fan attendance? If there isn't, how can we best figure out a way to make it happen that is efficient for the teams? So we're preparing for a lot of different scenarios, and certainly the question becomes, what are the local regulations where we go? As you know, it varies state to state, so we're monitoring that very closely so we can, again, just adapt the best way possible. The good thing is we have a lot of experience in delivering competitions in a COVID environment, so we feel comfortable about going forward with the competition. And the key is preparing and having the knowledge on how to experience to fall back on it. But clearly monitoring the local situation, taking the lead from health providers in each area where we're going to be in is critical, in monitoring that situation. And that's the work that's going on now to ensure that we can deliver this great competition in the best way possible for the success of it in this year.
Well, we have a couple of audience questions I want to get to, and they touch on some financial aspect of this, which I think is certainly not the most important one compared to people's health and lives, obviously, but it's obviously something we're sort of all alluding to in some sense. It's part of the fan element. This first question of a couple so far from the audience is specifically for Philippe, but I'd like anybody to jump in maybe after him as well. is it realistically possible to have a consistently profitable event model while legislating for the constant changes in national or international regulation? So I think maybe even in a general perspective, Philippe, from a big event, and anybody else can jump in from a venue or maybe singular event perspective, but how do you manage, obviously, significant hits to the budget? How do you mitigate that in new and creative ways?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll answer it from a properties perspective. Obviously, I think that the answer is very different whether you're a club, whether you're a stadium. From an event organizer perspective, I would say the answer is yes, as we think about Gold Cup. Obviously, the sources of revenue for an event like that include media distribution, include sponsorship. So if you need to mitigate against the ticketing aspect, the gate aspect, then you figure out how to best execute the competition in a way that reduces the cost, which essentially go in terms of moving teams around, stadium costs, things like that. So that's a sort of planning that needs to go in place. But to answer the question, it's possible to have a profitable event if you are not able to have the gate aspect to it.
Balazs, Sander, Amy, Chris, all of you kind of have gone through events already. You've seen some of the different aspects. If you think to make it profitable?
I mean, unquestionably, I think, we're finding probably, events to deliver are more expensive. These, whether it be implementing, more stricter hygiene protocols, it's amazing when you look at the numbers around reducing spectators, but still needing quite a high number of stewards to manage and enforce social distancing. And so I think kind of our experience, certainly at the moment, seems to imply that, it's still relatively expensive to deliver games, certainly behind closed doors or with fewer fans. But I mean, I think to Philippe's point, I think events obviously sit in a more broader space with broadcast revenue and everything else. So if you looked at it purely from a ticketing and operating kind of cost perspective, I think it's obviously going to be a lot tighter. I think inevitably events are going to be a bit more expensive as we start to kind of establish and bring in new protocols to sort of try and get events delivered. I'm assuming a lot of us have brought forward innovations. So maybe there's been investment made, maybe not it's all new, and some of it's just been, we were going to do that anyway. We were going to buy mag arches, we were going to move to contactless cash systems, we were going to, move to mobile ticketing. So those ways I think have been able to maybe sort of even themselves out over hopefully future years. But I think there's no, if you're not bringing in fans, you're losing the ticket revenue, you're certainly increasing your cost base. But I think to Philippe's point, an event is so much more than simply just that, and that's how these things will survive, I think.
Yeah, I think I would just add that one of the things that the pandemic has forced us to do is to be creative. So we've seen advances in digital signage, physical signage, all kinds of different sponsor opportunities that we wouldn't probably have seen as quickly as we did. To take the place of those in-person opportunities that our corporate partners and our broadcasters typically would have on site. So while gate revenue is obviously down and team expenses are higher, from everything from testing to single rooms to additional vehicles for transport and so on and so forth, we've really leaned into other ways to deliver value to both our fans and our partners.
And I think from our perspective, I mean, being a stadium, it's just being really difficult because the rental fees highly depend on gate revenues, and therefore the income is of course very low. A stadium in general is already difficult to make a profit with because it's a huge building that needs to be maintained, and in this situation it becomes virtually impossible. What we are trying to do though is trying to reinvent our relationship with the local government, because I think we are also for them in a very good position to help them reinvent social gatherings. We actually offer a very controlled environment. You need a ticket, you have a section with your own toilets, with your etc. So you can actually experiment in this building and learn lessons that apply probably in other parts of the city, whether it be bars or squares or, and however, it's being recognized by the government. In fact, the end of February, several matches will take place in the second division, that offer or that function also as a field lab to learn, to experiment. However, we're trying to promote that more so because I think it's needed for ourselves in that sense, but also actually for society, it might be very useful. And I think it will be good, to have that cooperation with the societal aspect in there. So it does help us to come closer to the local government as well and serve their purposes as well.
Well, we are down to the last few minutes here. We've had a few different fan questions come in, which are very good. They're a little bit involved questions that might not be able to be answered properly in 3 minutes. So and a couple for specific folks. So maybe I'll have you all maybe reach out to them specifically, because I do want to end on a note, maybe 30 seconds each or so. You've all touched on it a little bit. Obviously a big topic here that we could talk about much longer, but very briefly, what is a lasting impact for you that you've seen from this pandemic, from an event perspective, that you think will stick with us in the long run? Hopefully we're through this soon, but something that will stick when we're back to the quote unquote new normal. Maybe we'll go reverse from the beginning. Amy, if we can start with you.
Thanks. I think just the health and safety priority. So a lot of times, as event operators, we focus on the minute details of the operations or the big picture of the operations, but really leaning into the health and safety of not only our athletes but of our fans. And we don't think that I don't think that this is going to be something that we turn the page on and everyone goes back to normal, and everyone goes on their way and they're crowding on top of each other and no one's wearing masks and things like that. So how do we continue to evolve and advance from a health and safety standpoint for our own properties, but also for our fans?
Well, I totally agree with Amy. I think that the hygiene aspects will be with us for a long time. And if we can prepare, we could prepare, and we can prepare for the health and safety aspects well, then we will gain, and we have already gained a lot of experience, which if we could solve this, we could have solved this, then we could face other big challenges as well, I think. So for me, it's also the healthy, the hygienic aspects.
Sander, perhaps something similar from a venue perspective?
Yeah, well, I do agree with Balazs and Amy. The health and safety aspects will definitely stick. I think it's in our process. I think also our risk analysis has changed indefinitely. The risk of the pandemic, it was somewhere in there, but it was probably underrated. So that has changed, but of course that has no real meaning. But it makes you think, what kind of other risks are out there that we did not foresee. So it makes you very critical about, the entire business and where are my weaknesses and how do I cope with them.
Chris, you mentioned earlier you don't even know if you can do the athlete buffets or the fan beers, fan alcohol. I think those are two things that everybody will want to see back. The players certainly will want the buffets, but anything lasting, you think, from your perspective?
No, I think to all those points, the ability to be adaptable and flexible, I think sport's shown itself to be able to get fans back into stadia really well, and I think we'll take that forward to make sure we kind of adapt and move in the future. I think that's going to be hugely important to the industry.
And Philippe, we mentioned Gold Cup coming up, events coming up. What are you sort of seeing as a longer term effect maybe of how you're planning?
I certainly agree with the team about the health and safety requirements and essential protocols that need to be put in place and continue to be in place, and what we learned from those. For us, I think it's also part of the innovation and digitalization that's happening across the execution of our events. Just simple things like sometimes even the workshops we do with teams, doing that in a digital environment is not only a safer way to do it, but more efficient way to do it. So adapting to those innovations and embracing technology to figure out how to be more effective is critical. We've learned a lot through this last year, and those are here to stay. So continuing to do so will be important going forward, obviously for all of us, I believe.